Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have two amazing guests to reintroduce to you now. Doctors Jen and David Unwin are returning guests on our show. Check out their first appearance way back on episode 146 of Boundless Body Radio. Dr. Jen Unwin is a clinical health psychologist and has spent her professional life interested in the role of hope in chronic disease and how it can be used to bring about behavior change. Dr. Jen Unwin has also written a book called A Fork in the Road, a hopeful guide to food freedom to help people with food addiction. Dr. David Unwin is a general practitioner and family doctor and became an expert in managing chronic diseases. Their combined insights teamed up perfectly with Dr. David Unwin's interest in bringing about drug-free type 2 diabetes remission. For many years, they have been running group sessions in primary care to achieve just that, so far for literally hundreds of patients. This combination has also worked online, helping hundreds of thousands of people virtually through a low-carb course featured on diabetes.co.uk. Both doctors were featured in a BBC TV documentary, The Truth About Carbs, that was seen by millions of viewers, and they have continued sharing their message of hope wherever, whenever, and however they possibly can. Doctors Unwin, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Thank you so much. And as you probably can hear, it's actually just Dr. Jen, because Dr. David has some emergency babysitting duties.
Good for him for stepping up to the call. It's such a bummer to not talk to both of you, but I understand he's answering the call in a tight situation. So all the best to him. We introduced the both of you in the introduction as plural, but only one of you is here. We are still thrilled to be talking to you. Absolutely love your work. It was so fun to go back and listen to the episode we did that was almost 3 years ago now. And to just see you guys are continuing. I can't believe it either. It's crazy. But to see that you guys are continuing to do such amazing work. Our conversation last time was all about food addiction and reversing type 2 diabetes. Is there anything you want to go back a few years ago on and like revise or say, hey, we got this wrong, we actually are switching, we're doing something completely different these days? Or do you find that the longer you've been doing this, the more and more it's proven to be a winning formula?
Yeah, I would say the latter. I would say, we just believe in it more and more as time goes by. And we couldn't, but, when we started 12 years ago, it is now, we were just we saw the group. We do a group every month at David's practice for the people who like that kind of thing, and they just come along. And we were saying, it's 12 years since we started doing this, 12 and a half years. And some of the original people from the first group we ever ran are still there. They stuck it out with us, and they really believe in it for their own health, and they come just to help other people now. Really, they've totally got in the swing of it. I mean, obviously you kind of refine the way that you do it. I think David's really refined how he does it face to face in the clinic, and we often talk about how he has those conversations. I think that's really important for doctors and nurses and anyone else working with patients, is how you sort of construct those conversations you have with people, because I mean the facts stay the same, that for people with type 2 diabetes, obesity, I mean many other conditions now that David's using low carb with, polycystic ovarian disease, other skin disorders, heart failure. I mean, there's all kinds of conditions now where he will suggest that people try this approach. So we know it works. It's really, how do you have that conversation so that people feel that they can do that in their lives, something that's a bit countercultural, to eat in this way. And often their families are not eating in this way. So it's how it's the behavioral side, really, the psychology side of how you help people to make those changes and then to keep going. And of course, one of the challenges of keeping going is those people who have that challenge of food addiction, which is what I've become super interested in, because it's my challenge as well. And there's a whole community of clinicians trying to help people with this food, and academics who are doing the research, trying to help people with this food addiction problem. And I think the longer we go on with low carb and trying to introduce it into clinics, the more we see this population of people who, despite knowing the facts, despite knowing that they feel so much better when they stick to it, really struggle to stay the course. We'll have times when they, I mean, you'll know people yourself that really are doing kind of self-harming things with food, just like people do with alcohol or drugs or cigarettes or any of those things. And it's not because they're not intelligent people who want to do the right thing. It's because the brain gets kind of hijacked by some of these foods. And it's super fascinating to try and work out how we can help people with that particular challenge.
I ruminate and spin and stress out about exactly that when I'm trying to help my clients who are clearly self-harming themselves. They are intelligent, they know what has worked, they've tried it in the past and it worked, and they still struggle. And it was even yesterday, like a person I've been meeting with for a long time has done really well with his chronic disease and is backsliding a bit and got some blood work back that was not favorable. And I just spend all my time thinking, what can I say to it? How do I phrase this in a way that I'm making this serious, but I want you to know you have the power. You can do this. I'm here to help, but like it's equal parts.
Yeah.
It's so encouraging, but like, I just want to like get that message in a certain way and phrase it in exactly the right way that person feels like, okay, this is important, but I got this. It's a challenge.
It's a really kind of delicate line. And I think it actually, I know some people say, we shouldn't call it an addiction, or we shouldn't say the word addiction, that's shaming, or it's, people won't like it. But actually, I personally think it's kind of the opposite. I think for me as well, it was really useful to have that model. I mean, finally, everything kind of clicked into place. Like, oh, I mean, I'm a psychologist. It took me ages to see it, which is ridiculous because I work with people with other addictions. But to finally think, right, if it's an addiction, then we need to deal with it as an addiction. It's not my fault that this has happened, because it's kind of to do with how my brain's wired and how certain foods will affect my my reward center. But it is my response. Now that I know that, it's my responsibility. And we know that people do recover from other addictions, and we know there's a lot of knowledge now in addiction medicine around alcohol and drugs, because obviously there's services and research around how we help people with those problems. And I think we can transfer a lot of that knowledge that's already there just to this challenge. But I think it does help people, and there's some research which shows that actually if we use that addiction model, people are, it's kind of less stigmatizing for people, because otherwise people think, well, why are you doing this stupid stuff? You're, like you say, you're literally harming yourself. But I think if we see it from addiction, and through an addiction lens, we can see why that happens, because the reward centers of the brain literally hijacked. You're doing stuff, but it's not really under that conscious control. But once you name it as an addiction and you think about it in that way, then we can start moving forwards. And that was really the basis of, I don't know if you know, but we did a study, and we've written up the first part of it, which was probably the first sort of study looking at treatment for food addiction, because food addiction isn't an official diagnosis in the DSM in the States, or we have the ICD over here in Europe from the World Health Organization. It's not an official classification of a disease. There's little funding for research. There's little funding for treatment, sort of treatment interventions. So we got together as a bunch of us. There's a group in the States, a group in Sweden, and myself and a nutritionist, Heidi Yever, that I work with here in the UK. And we all had a similar treatment model, and we just said, right, well, let's just evaluate, is it actually working, what we're doing with people. And so we published that a couple of years ago, and we're just now looking at the 1 year data. We've actually got 1 year and 2 year data, but we're just looking at the 1 year data now, and it's looking really good. And basically, the approach that we take is to educate people about the effect of food on the brain, and to teach them about addiction and how that works in the brain. You know, basically, the reward center was designed obviously for survival. It was designed to drive us to eat, so that we we had enough nutrition to survive. So, you know, we're quite driven to eat. But what can happen with these modern foods that are high in sugar, refined grains, combinations of salt, fat, and sugar, very sort of unnatural things that we never would have found in the wild. They supercharge the reward center and the dopamine, and then we're kind of weirdly driven, and that's where the cravings come from, and the compulsions to kind of eat stuff that we don't really want to be eating. And that part of the brain is not verbal, so we can sort of try and argue with ourselves, like, oh, I shouldn't be eating that, you know, I won't have any biscuits today. But actually that part of the brain isn't verbal, it's just a drive. So you're driven. And, you know, people listening may have had that experience. I certainly did, where you'd say, oh, no biscuits today, and then you'd get home from work and you'd reach immediately, your hand would reach for those foods that you didn't want to be eating. And at the same time, you're saying to yourself, why am I doing this? I don't want to be doing this. So there's that sort of horrible tension, if you like, between the drive and actually logically what you're trying to do. So we explain all of that sort of brain neurochemistry to people. And then we talk about, in that sense, because it's an addiction, what do we know about addictions? We know that the abstinence is the treatment for alcohol, substance use disorder, for drug, you know, substance use disorders, for nicotine. We know that if you can abstain, then the cravings wane and the damage you're doing to yourself wane. So we just apply that and we say, right, well, then we're not going to eat our drug foods. And drug foods aren't things like steak and broccoli. They're things like pizza and donuts and all these sort of modern foods. So we get people to sort of design themselves really what kind of food plan they want. Just meat, fish, eggs, you know, vegetables, low carb fruits. It's basically a sort of, you know, well formulated low carbohydrate diet, you know, that the kinds of foods that will suit them. And we talk about the importance of abstinence, and then support is a big part of it as well. Like in any addiction, isolation is the danger. So we try and get people in groups, supporting each other, being in contact, you know, on a regular basis. And we have meetings on a regular basis, just like you would with any other addiction, really. And we got some really great results just sort of pre and post the intervention. And now we're looking at the 1-year data, and it's looking really good for people that stick the course. They get some really good results with, like, the addiction symptoms coming down, mental well-being going up, you know, and other sort of, you know, all the usual kind of physical and mental advantages that we see when people stick to this kind of low carbohydrate, real food diet. So we're very happy about that.
You should be so proud. This work, just so much needs to be done. And I made this point several times on the show. Like, there's certain things that if I were addicted to, it would be very challenging to be able to do those things or do them in a way that was socially acceptable in public. Like, if I was an alcoholic and wanted to be smashed by 8 in the morning, I couldn't just like walk around and do shots and whatever, like in my neighborhood. I have a job, I have to work. Like, that doesn't really work. Smoking has become like not really that commonplace anymore, a lot less. You know, I've made the point, like, here in the Salt Lake Valley, I'm sure there's tons of people that have drugs. I don't know any drug dealers. I don't know where to find drugs and drug dealers at my age. Like, that ship's kind of past me. But like, it is totally socially acceptable to have bowls of sugar as soon as you wake up, and then to go to pancakes and waffles for a work meeting at 8 in the morning. Like, that is acceptable. It is totally acceptable to drink soda and buy candy bars at the hardware store. Like, it's just everywhere, and it's acceptable and fine. That's a problem. That's a crazy problem.
It's a problem. And I really, really and people we've spoken to who've quit various other things, because addictions tend to go, if you've got an addictive brain, it's quite likely that you started off with the food maybe as a child, because that's the only sugar's the only psychoactive substance we give our kids, right? And we say, it's a treat and you've been good, so you can have a lollipop or an ice cream or whatever it is. And isn't it cute? He's kind of put his face in his birthday cake. Oh, how cute. And all this kind of sugar at every turn, like you say, but it's the only psychoactive substance we give our kids. And then once we've wired our brains for addiction, it's easier to get addicted to other stuff like phones and gambling and alcohol and and drugs and exercise and all these other things, kind of, not always, but they tend to go together. So you're right, it's everywhere, it's socially sanctioned, we give it to our kids, it's cheap, it's advertised to, so Clarissa Kennedy, who's one of the other people who was involved in the research, one day went out with a clicker and she clicked every time she saw some kind of food cue, like, yeah, she was in the shop and there was chocolate there, or there was an advertising for Coke or whatever, click, 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 click. And it's literally hundreds of times a day we're cued to eat. And also those of us who live without all that stuff now, because we need to, it takes a long time for family and friends to get with the program. For a long time, work colleagues are bringing in cupcakes and putting them right under your nose, and there's a lot of difficult conversations to be had. And I think that's as much a challenge as anything else, really, is that literally that keeping going in the culture that we have, because all of us that do this, for whatever reason we do it, are countercultural. We're doing something a bit different.
That's right. I'm actually a little bit surprised that the clicker actually held up with all the food cues we have around us all the time to just like break or whatever. And yeah, that is a good point. And I wanted to make sure that we went back before we really deep dive into addiction. I want to go back and hear your story, how you got involved in the low carbohydrate community to begin with. Obviously, when that all started, you really weren't paying attention. Nobody was really paying attention, like food addiction at the time. That's something you learned later. But how did this all come about for you in your career? Alongside, David and his work? Obviously, both of you are doctors, but working in very different fields, or so it seems.
Yeah, it was just one of those kind of serendipity things. So what happened was, so my personal history is definitely, looking back, is a lifetime of sugar addiction, essentially. As a child, I was very interested in sweets and cakes and all of that, if I could get my hands on them. And yeah, just whenever I could, and just my earliest memories are kind of those kinds of foods. So, but then that led into a lifetime of sort of putting on weight, dieting, putting on weight. It's that classical story of really trying to sort of control those urges, and being able to quite a good extent, really, because I would just follow whatever the latest, Weight Watchers, Slimming World, whatever the latest craze was, I'd do it, and I'd do it very determinedly and lose a lot of weight. But of course you can't really live on those schemes, or because I hadn't understood it was an addiction, you'd get to goal weight and say, well, I'll just have a little bit because it's my birthday, the classic thing, or whatever. And then that's never going to work, just as it doesn't work to say to an alcoholic, well, just have a little bit of whiskey because it's a Friday night. We all know that's crazy. So that was me, and that had been going on. And to be honest, it was still going on when I found a book which was called Escape the Diet Trap, and I think it's still in publication. It's by a British GP called Dr. John Briffer. And I was reading that, and he was basically talking about insulin, sugar, insulin, hunger, the hunger roller coaster. And he was sort of describing the benefits of a low carbohydrate diet, and why it makes sense in all kinds of ways, physiologically, but also in terms of sort of hunger signals, to have a lot less sugar and carbohydrates. So I'm a bit of all or nothing person. So I went full steam ahead into this low carbohydrate diet, and I felt terrible for about 8 days, and then I felt amazing. And you know, felt really, really well mentally and physically, and kept telling David about it, and he could see how well I was doing. And in the book, it did mention about people with diabetes. At the same time, he was getting really burnt out in his general practice. He was, you know, just seeing people get sicker and sicker on more and more tablets. He didn't really feel that like anything he was doing was good medicine. And he was sort of thinking about retiring, which is funny now because he's really not thinking about retiring now, 12 years later. He's thinking about retiring. And I'd been reading this book, and so it all came together that I sort of said to him, you know, well, if you're going to retire, why don't we, for once in our lives, put our skills together, and we'll run a group at your practice and get them to do this low carbohydrate thing, and let's see what happens, you know, if we can help people with diabetes. And we were a bit scaredy cats at the beginning, and we just started with the pre-diabetics because they weren't really on any medication. We thought, well, we can't, you know, nothing too terrible is going to happen, surely. And but as you say, back in the day, 12, 13 years ago, nobody was doing that in the UK. We didn't realize it was going to be controversial. It was pretty controversial, and David did get criticized at a number of conferences that he went to, you know, when we had some data. You know, particularly some dietitians were really upset with what he was doing. He doesn't get that so much now. I think it is more widely accepted as an option. Yeah, but certainly back in the day it was unusual. And then the results were, I mean, he just couldn't believe how well people were, and they were coming off medications for, you know, antidepressants, antihypertensives, other kinds of medications they were coming off, and they, you know, the blood sugars were improving. So then we just sort of developed it on and got more bold and did people with type 2 diabetes and other conditions. And now he's got, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, I think about 150 patients in his practice who've reversed type 2 diabetes drug free, and they're off all medications, and lots and lots of other people who've really mitigated the disease. You know, it's much better control. They just haven't quite got over the line for remission in terms of their blood sugars, but you know, they're much better than they were on much less medication, you know, cutting out insulin and so on. So it's just been, you know, a wonderful ride really since you know, over those 12 years, and we get invited to speak places. And yeah, and he you know, he's absolutely still energized doing that work, and writing all of it. I mean, he's actually quite dyslexic, and he'd never written an academic paper. I'd had a couple of academic jobs, so I knew about that kind of thing, but he'd never written a paper. And so in the last 12 years of his career, I think he's up to at least 10 papers now on all this stuff. So yeah, it's been amazing.
That's incredible. I mean, I obviously am not practicing medicine whatsoever, but I can relate to the feeling of like, you've tried something that everybody told you to do. You do it with everybody, and nobody can do it. Everybody's goofing it up. You blame them. It's easy to blame them. You didn't count right. You didn't have, you know, your food journal. You didn't
Yeah.
meditate about your emotions or pay attention to when you were 80% full, or hit your calorie numbers or macro numbers or whatever. It doesn't work for anybody. And then you find this weird thing that nobody's talking about, and you try it on yourself, and then you try it on a few people, and then you try it with more people and more and more and more people. And it's like, it always works. Like, you can't find a time that it doesn't work. It's magic. It's seemingly magic. And I always want to like put myself into a practicing, you know, doctor's head when they get to that space. It must be joyous to feel like you were burned out of this terrible career where, you know, you're just slinging pills, what Sarah Halberg calls in her latest book, like she's a legal, you know, a drug dealer essentially, to see the opposite and see people get better. Like we made this point last time, but 150 is a big number, and that's just a number. But when you think of those individual lives and the impacts that has, incredible.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, absolutely incredible. And it's just one guy I'm thinking of who came to the group last night. He was in the original group 12 years ago. He was extremely overweight. He was on loads of medication for blood sugar, uh, blood pressure, antidepressants. I mean, the poor guy was miserable, um, and in pain. And I mean, he bounds in now. You know, he's the right weight for his, you know, for his body. He goes to the gym. You know, you know, he's got grown up kids and a wife and like you say, a life. And it just makes so much difference in people's families, you know, in terms of what they can do. And yeah, I mean, it's absolutely wonderful to see people transform their lives in that way, just through this simple advice. But it's not always easy. That's what we say to people. We say it's simple, it's not always easy.
Yep. Well, and it's so cool to think that this guy might not need that group as much anymore for his own success, but he's coming because he's so lit up also, and he wants to help other people.
Yeah. He brings his photos and his graphs, you know, and he says, you know, if I can do it, you know, I'm just like the guy next door. If I can do it, you can do it, you know. And this was me, like, you know, I don't know how many pounds heavier, 50 or 60 pounds heavier, and you know how much his life has changed. Yeah, he just does it he comes now to inspire other people. It's wonderful.
That's amazing. I love that. Okay, so as we're traveling along in your personal story and you're helping people, how does food addiction start to manifest itself as far as something that you became more aware of over time?
Yeah. So yeah, so we're doing that work, and I'm, you know, yeah, and I was feeling so amazing. And then, but then I did notice, you know, in myself, even though I knew when I ate this kind of real food, low carbohydrate, you know, feeling fantastic, but it didn't mean that I didn't drift, or I started getting pulled into keto baking, which is a absolute classic for food addicts. They think, well, yeah, okay, I can't have cake, but you know, there's these sweetener things that you can have, and people are making. There's all these websites, aren't they, for people making keto cookies out of almond flour and all of those things. And of course, that is not a good idea for people with a food addiction, because they'll make a batch of keto cookies and just eat the whole lot. And then you don't feel so great, actually. You know, that's not a good way to do low carb, really. Obviously, some people can just have a little bit and that's fine, they can moderate, but a lot of us can't do that. So I would be kind of slipping into that. Or you know, maybe it's my 50th birthday, so I think, well, I just have a cake because it's my 50th birthday. And then of course what happens, because it's an addiction, and once you have that bit of cake or that slice of pizza, it's lighting up all the reward systems again, and the cravings come back, and it's really hard to quit again. And in fact, you know, patients always find this, that if they've been abstinent for a while but then they slip up, you go straight back into it, almost like as bad as you were before, sometimes worse. And it can be really hard to pull it back in again. I remember one Christmas when I thought, oh well, it's only one day, you know, I'll have whatever it is on Christmas Day. And I think it was the following May that I finally managed to get myself back together and, you know, really get back
Wow.
to a clean way of eating. Yeah. Which sounds crazy, doesn't it? But, you know, just those cravings are so much. And then I heard Bitten Johnson, who's one of the real world kind of acknowledged clinicians in this space. She's a nurse from a background from Sweden. And I was listening to some stuff on the Diet Doctor website, or I was kind of looking stuff up, and I saw, oh, Bitten Johnson talking about sugar. She calls it sugar addiction. She's very clear that sugar, you know, starches and sugar are the problem. So she calls it sugar addiction. So I watched this video, and obviously, you know, it just went clunk click, really. I just thought, oh, of course, you know, of course it is an addiction. That's exactly what it looks like. It's got all the hallmarks of you know, cravings and compulsions, needing more and more to get the same effect, you know, thinking about food all the time, losing control of the amount, continuing to do it despite the fact, you know, it's doing you harm. Those are all the hallmarks of any addiction. And of course that's what I was doing to some extent, and what I knew other people were doing. So I actually was at the point of retiring from the National Health Service, which is where I was, what my main work was. And I thought, right, okay, I'm going to go and train with Bitten Johnson because she's the, she's the guru. So I trained with Bitten, and that's where I met this colleague, Heidi Yever, who's a nutritionist, who's also in the UK. So we formed a strong connection, and we kind of have been a team ever since. So doing this research and the conference that we're going to talk about, I met her there, and lots of other people that I connected with through that. And really the work's gone on from there. I was determined then to try and do some research in this area, because there isn't really any. And of course, we just have to, like David and I did, we just do it off our own bat with no resources, because I'm not aligned to a university or anything like that. We just kind of sort of make it work somehow. And we ran a conference a couple of years ago, a day conference in Bristol, which was the first sort of food addiction day. And then this one that we're running in London on May the 17th is more focused on the campaigning work that we're doing. I think it's really important that we get food addiction recognized as a legitimate condition for a number of reasons. One is that then there'll be more money for research. Two, it'll be possible to design and evaluate treatments, and treatments would be more widely available for people, which they aren't now. If you go to your doctor and say you've got a food addiction, they're not going to know what to do with you, because they'll either send you to an eating disorder service, and then many of the eating disorder services are based on this idea that all foods fit, and that really you should be able to eat all foods in moderation. That's sort of simplifying it a lot, but that's usually the aim of treatment. And of course, that's never going to work for a person with food addiction. Or you might get sent, possibly you get sent to an addiction service, but they're not going to know what to do with you, because they're used to dealing with people with alcohol, drugs, and you may get sent to a mental health professional, and they're probably not going to know what to do with you because it isn't a recognized condition, and there isn't training for professionals on the whole, apart from you'd have to go and find it and find Bitten, and there's one or two other people who are training people. So Heidi and I are really committed to this idea, and other people, this idea that we want, in Europe anyway, the WHO, the World Health Organization, to recognize that is a legitimate condition. We know that that's a hell of a mountain to climb, because the food industry has enormous power and lobbying power, and they're not going to want the idea in the public's minds that these ultra processed foods are addictive. But I think it'll come out in the end, just like it did with cigarettes. It'll just take as long as it did for cigarettes to be recognized as harmful as they were. So we made a submission a couple of years ago to the WHO, and they knocked it back, which we weren't surprised about. And one of the reasons they gave for knocking it back was they said, well, there's no consensus amongst the experts that this thing exists, or what causes it, or what to call it even. So we thought, right, okay. So over the last year, we've been getting as many experts as we can in the field, either researchers or clinicians, or some people who do a bit of both, together. And we've been doing an exercise where we've been forming a consensus around what is this thing that we're calling food addiction. What do we want to call it? How are we going to define it? What are the causes of it? What research needs to be done urgently as a next step, and blah blah blah. And so that's all coming together. So we had about 40 experts go through the process, and we've got the document more or less ready to go, and that's going to be launched at this conference in London on May the 17th. And some of the big names who've been involved in the project will be speaking at the event, and people can attend. We understand that not everybody can come to London for a day, so it's also going to be live streamed, so people will be able to hear, you know, this consensus statement. And then going forwards, we'll be making another submission to the WHO when we're ready. And there's a group in the States that are also making a submission to the American Psychiatric Association, who look after the DSM, which is the where it would be recognized as a disorder in the States. So we're obviously working with them so that we're saying got the same, you know, singing from the same hymn sheet, as they say. Yeah, so it's exciting, and it's nice to be involved in something which I think, you know, could make a lot of difference in people's lives if we manage to get this get the condition recognized and talked about a lot more.
It's incredible. Wow, I absolutely love that. I want to talk about this conference. Before we do, I just want to ask you personally, when you were learning about this stuff, you're finding bitten stuff, it must have taken a minute or two to sink in for yourself. Like, not only is this a problem, but this is a problem for me personally. What was it like for you to come to that realization? And what things have you done since then for you, but not just the things that you offer everybody else? What have you done personally to, you know, avoid this as a problem for you in your life?
Great question. Yep. So I think it's that acceptance that, you know, can take a while and is quite an emotional process, that there are certain foods that you must abstain from, you know, and that, yeah, maybe we're doing it one day at a time, but actually we're doing this now. And I cannot eat those foods in moderation. I've lost control of my relationship with, let's say, cake or chocolate or whatever it is for anybody, you know, and really I mustn't eat those foods again. So it's that idea of abstinence, and then how am I going to do that every day for the rest of my life? But in some ways it's also liberating, because it's actually easier to have none of something than it is for me, for us food addicts, than it is to have a little bit. Because that's really a struggle. So accepting that that's the case, and to live well, that's how I have to live. And then other things that I did, because I did recognize for myself that, you know, there is this overlap between other things that kind of stimulate the reward system. So I've also gave up caffeine because I don't tolerate it terribly well anyway. I'm a bit of a migraineur, headachy person, so I was interested to see what would happen if I gave up caffeine. That was a horrible process as well, but that's been worth it, and I'm fine now. I don't miss that at all. I have decaf, or, you know, just drink other stuff. And then the other thing that I did, not because I had a problem at all with alcohol, I've never been a big drinker, but I did notice that if I had a drink, a day or two later, I would have some incredible cravings for sweet foods. And that was something that Bitten explained to me. She said, well, you know, it's kind of all the same, and it doesn't necessarily happen straight away, but because you're kind of messing with the reward system again with the alcohol, you know, it will be related to food cravings. So it's about 3 years now since I've had a drink either. And occasionally I kind of think, oh, it'd be nice, it would be nice, but I don't miss it that much, really. I do still miss the foods. That was really always my thing, you know, certain foods, but I just know that it's, you know, it's not the road to happiness at all. You know, it's much better to abstain. I try, you know, beyond the food and the substances, I try to get a lot of exercise in, and get outdoors as much as I can. That really helps me to be out in the daylight. And I think that's probably because we know that serotonin and melatonin, all these things are kind of related, aren't they? And yeah, exercise really good for getting dopamine in other ways. So trying to find healthy ways to get that dopamine fix. And for me, that's, you know, some exercise, and yeah, maybe some other things as well. And also I'm so connected now with the community, but staying connected with the community of other people. A lot of people who work in this space are also food addicts themselves. So the guys that we we work with in North America called Sweet Sobriety, Molly and Clarissa, and they host with Vera Tarman, they host the Food Junkies podcast, which I highly commend to people. They're really great guys, and you know, they're food addicts themselves, and you know, so it's really important to stay connected to the community, like in any addiction really, and not kind of feel ashamed and isolated, but you know, just talk about it like it's a normal thing.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you had a similar path to me where you just eventually found yourself, you know, carnivore adjacent. I feel like in today's day and age, we have to say whether it's actually purely strict or not strict. To me, it's all the same. If your diet is mostly animal based, I think that's totally fine. Did you eventually learn to appreciate and totally satiate yourself with really delicious and really good kind of animal foods?
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, they're all delicious, and you know, like, so we did a retreat recently for some new clients, and they said, well, it's great because you're kind of swapping foods that you like for other foods that you like. They were amazed that you could have bacon and egg and butter and beef and all of. They were like, you know, these are delicious things. Nobody's unhappy if they get to eat that. Yeah, so we're very like you say, carnivore adjacent. Wouldn't say I have been strictly in the past, but we tend to let a bit of vegetable entertainment on the plate occasionally, particularly because we've got the grandkids here at the minute, so we sort of, you know, it's a bit more, it's not quite as strict. If it's just David and I, we often would just have a big old steak for lunch and move on with our days.
I totally understand. That's great. Yeah, to me, it's all kind of the same. If you're mostly animal based, I don't get too worked up about how much other things sneak in, which is totally fine. And that takes us to this conference. So tell us about the conference that's coming up. It's May 17th. I want to make sure I get the title right. The International Food Addiction Consensus Conference.
Yes.
Is this, I know you've hosted other things in the past, but is this technically the very first one?
So it's technically the first sort of international one, if you like, where we've got all these amazing international speakers, a lot of them from the States, I have to say, and Vera's coming over from Canada. Yeah, so we've called it the International Food Addiction Consensus Conference because we'll be launching this consensus statement about food addiction, and that has truly been an international effort. Although, as I say, you know, a lot of the big speakers in this space are that you guys in the States are ahead of us, and that may be something to do with your food environment. I don't know. Possibly.
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 That's great. Well, tell us about some of the speakers. Who's going to be speaking there?
Okay, so there's obviously the incredibly wonderful Robert Lustig, who's
Amazing.
you know, just so well known for his advocacy of us recognizing the dangers of ultra processed foods and the addictive effects that they have. So we're totally thrilled to have his support. So he's really our keynote at the beginning. The other person we've got who's become very well known in the UK, Chris Van Tullochen. I don't know if you've seen his book, Ultra Processed People.
Really, really good book. I really enjoyed that one.
Yeah. And it's, you know, been very, very well received, that book, hasn't it, everywhere. And in fact, it was his, so he's got a twin brother called Zan Van Tullochen, and they do a lot of TV work in the UK. And it was Zan that we did the program with, The Truth About Carbs. And I think you can probably still find that on catch up somewhere, or it'll be on YouTube or something. Yeah, so they're twin brothers, and it was Chris who was actually concerned about Zand and got interested in this idea of the addictive nature of ultra processed food because he was worried about his brother's health. But he seems to be going from strength to strength now. But it's Chris that's speaking, the author of the book, so he's coming. We've got Michael Moss, who wrote the book Hooked, and he's an investigative journalist who's really looked at the food industry and whether they know exactly what they're doing and what it is that they're doing to get us hooked to these foods. We've got Vera Tarman, who's host of Food Junkies podcast and really has a lot of experience in working with people with very severe food addiction problems, and she's talking about why abstinence is the treatment, and why that's so important. We've got a guy called Dr. David Wiss, who's a really amazing guy, and in fact he'd be a great person to have on a podcast, I think. He helped us write up the first paper that we did on the food addiction study, and he's very knowledgeable about this overlap or interrelationship that you can get between food addiction and eating disorders, and how you work with that, how you tease out, is the food addiction the primary problem, and then eating disorders have kind of followed on to control the food addiction problem, or is it, is the eating disorder primary? And that's quite important for clinicians to understand, so because we don't want to be giving people the wrong advice for the condition that they have, basically. And Timothy Brewerton, again, he's from the States, and he's also talking about eating disorders. We've got Susan Peirce Thompson, who's from Bright Line Eating. I don't know if you've heard of, she's a kind of she's more on the sort of neuro side, but she has a program which is called Bright Line Eating, which a lot of people have found very helpful, which is basically this idea that you have these kind of you have these firm lines over which you don't cross in terms of your eating, what you're eating, and your behavior around food. And she's been incredibly supportive of the whole process. Let me think, am I forgetting anybody? I'm sure I am. Oh, Nicola Vina, who's very, very famous in terms of the again, the sort of neurological side of sugar addiction, and she's written the book Sugarless. And Erica Lafada, again, as he's a researcher from the States, and has done a lot of work with Ashley Gerhardt, who's the person who is behind the only validated measure of food addiction, which is the Yale Food Addiction Scale. So they both have worked on that, and she's also supporting the work to get food addiction recognized in the DSM in the States. So she'll be there as well. I think that's just about everybody. I'm sure I've probably forgotten somebody. They'll be offended.
It's an amazing lineup.
I apologize.
We
Yeah,
apologize
it's a
if we forgot
really good lineup.
Wow, that's amazing.
So we're ramming it all into one day. It's all rammed into one day. So
got it. And
Anna
then the cool
Lemke. I've got Anna Lemke, who wrote Dopamine Nation. Have you read Dopamine Nation?
Oh, you know what? It's so funny. I started it a few years ago, and I got so depressed after like the third or fourth chapter. I stopped. I need to go back and listen to it again with fresh ears.
Yeah. Listen to it on Audible. Yeah, so she's actually zooming in from the States. She couldn't just make it, but she'll be speaking live online. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, what an amazing lineup. And the cool part about this is if somebody is not able to attend in person, they can also attend virtually. If people have the option to be in person, but they can also attend virtually as well.
Yeah, we'll be live streaming the event, and if you buy the ticket for that, even if it's not, in your time zone to watch it live, you'll get all the recordings, pretty sharpish after the event. And yeah, the live stream ticket, pretty reasonable price, I think. And I'm sure you'll post I'll send you the link so you can post that down below.
Yeah. We'll post a link so anybody listening right now or watching could be able to see that and attend the conference. I think it's going to be wonderful. I thought the pricing was very, very fair. And I think for the resource you're going to get, it's absolutely worth it. If you notice the date, it's Friday, May 17th, which is right before the PHC UK conference, which is on the 18th and 19th. Also in London, probably not in exactly the same place, but that was an organization that you helped to found. How proud have you been of how that conference has grown over the years? Everybody was talking about how amazing last year's was, and it's just grown and grown.
It has. It's become really popular. So was it 9 or 10 years ago? I think, a group of interested doctors and healthcare professionals kind of got together and said, we need to kind of pull together. And I think there was maybe 50 of us in a small room in Birmingham the first year, something like that. And it's just grown. And again, I think because it's live stream now, people, international people can come, and we've been able to, thanks to a very generous benefactor. We've been able to sort of fly some amazing people in. Yeah, so we always it's always fun to go and meet up with people from the international speaking circuit and see what the latest is. I think it was Ben Bickman last year was amazing. I mean, he's always an amazing speaker. You know, I could listen to him all day, so it's always
So
good
good.
to hear him speak. Yeah.
So good. Yeah, I got to meet him for the first time at the conference that was just held by Dave Feldman in Las Vegas. I got to meet him for the first time. He's just down the road. He's like 30 minutes away from me down the road. We still
Wow.
hadn't met in person until I saw his presentation. For 45 minutes, the entire audience is just completely fixated on him. He does such a good job.
Yeah, it's just this kind of logical progression, isn't it? Yeah, he's a
Yep.
very, very wonderful speaker.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
David will be
Wow. Okay.
speaking this year.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Yeah.
He'll do great. That's amazing. We already mentioned Dr. Sarah Halberg's book that just came out. Unfortunately, Dr. Halberg passed away 2 years ago of a fatal lung cancer, non-smoking lung cancer. The book is incredible. I have it right here. Status Quo Thinking is Harming Your Health, a Physician's Final Plea. Basically, it's written in the tone of like, if you're reading this, I'm not around. I got through, the introduction crying probably 3 or 4 times. I'm a few chapters in, and she tells a story in one of her chapters as she was practicing medicine that this woman had come in for, she wasn't feeling well, and they thought it was a urinary tract infection. It ended up being a lot more serious. But the bigger thing was her and her husband, especially this woman that's being treated, she kind of gave up. She didn't have any more fight left in her. And what kind of condition she could have had, whether she would have recovered or not in a few months, she ended up passing away that day. She had lost hope, and thus things escalated very, very quickly, more so than I would have expected for what they were describing the problem to be. And she was gone that day. And Sarah explained how important that was to her to understand how important hope is. And even though she had been dealing with this fatal condition, she wanted to see her children grow up. She definitely got more time than they thought initially. Eventually, she didn't make it. But the power of hope. I can't bring you on the show and not discuss with you your focus on the power of hope. Why is it so important for people to feel that they have power, they are empowered, they can make good changes and deal with some of this stuff?
Yeah. I mean, this is what my doctorate was on, was the power of hope in healthcare, basically, and what a difference it makes when people can kind of see that they have some personal control over their future, and that there can be a good future, a better future. And even in these sort of desperately sad and even seemingly hopeless situations, how can somebody kind of say, well, even if, I mean, probably like Sarah did in a way, even if this is the situation I'm in, what are my best hopes for these next few years, and how can I make that happen? Is, and how can healthcare professionals kind of facilitate that sort of thinking, really, through how they talk to people and the questions they ask and the way they sort of communicate. So my research was actually with people who were having lower limb amputations, and I was really interested in, I'd always been interested in, when I worked in big hospitals, you could have 2 people with exactly the same condition, whatever that might be, and in this case, basically they'd had a lower limb amputated, and one person would kind of adjust and adapt and cope really, really well and do all the rehab and kind of get back on with their lives, and seemingly have this really good quality of life and this sort of mental well-being. And then other people would really, really struggle, and they'd really be low in moods and not wanting to do things, and they'd feel disfigured by this leg, and it would kind of ruin their quality of life and their relationships. I was just really interested about what is it that makes that difference between the people that cope really well with these health challenges and people who don't cope so well. So we did kind of 6-month follow-up of people who were having these lower limb amputations, and gave them like a million questionnaires to fill in. And it was this one thing that was this there was a, you know, there's a hope questionnaire, would you believe? And that was the thing that predicted, you know, down the line in 6 months who'd be doing well and who wouldn't be doing so well. And hope seems to be this thing which is about having a sense of what a better future is, and then also being able to see the steps to that future, and also having the motivation to take those steps. It seems to be those three components, you know, having a goal, being able to see, you know, what's the next step towards that goal, and thirdly, you know, do I believe in myself enough that I can take that step? But it's not necessarily a fixed thing, and we can, through our conversations with people, you know, ask them to think about what might be better, or what the best hopes are, and to think about, well, what might be a tiny step in that direction, or, you know, what would it look like if I was a little bit nearer that goal. And also to encourage them to think about all the other things that they've achieved in the past, or, you know, their personal strengths, or what their friends would say about them, to sort of give them that sense again that, you know, they can do this thing. And all of this applies to the addiction work that I do, because people nearly always feel totally hopeless about ever being able to break out of it, or have a different future. But, you know, you can work with those kinds of questions to encourage people, you know, to think, you know, what it might be like if they can, you know, if they could, you know, break free of this sugar addiction, and what might be one tiny step that they can take today, and all the difficult things that they've been able to do in the past, and bring all of that to this situation, so that they don't feel as hopeless. And then with all the social support and everybody encouraging them, you know, you usually get this lovely sense of momentum then, when, you know, so I was just saying, we've just done a retreat. Actually, I do some live retreats at Coombe Grove in the UK, and we just had our first online follow-up with that group, and it was again it's just lovely medicine, just hearing, you know, that people are, you know, 2 or 3 weeks in, and, you know, they haven't had any sugar and they feel amazing, and they can't believe how well they feel, and that, so therefore, you know, they're doing a little bit more exercise, and it becomes this sort of virtual cycle of them noticing benefits, and other things coming out of that. So yeah, it's lovely.
It's a very lovely answer. You hear the saying with kids that you should be really concerned if they're very noisy or very quiet. One of the two, you should be a little bit concerned. And the grandkids have been very, very quiet up to this point. So I'm gonna turn you loose to make sure Dr. David Unwin is doing okay with the kiddos so far. This has been an amazing conversation. I treasure any time I get to chat with you, and I've loved following your work, and so much respect to you and David for everything you guys do. Where can people go to find you and connect with you and your work, and also where can they go to find the conference?
Yep. Okay. So I hang around on X, and I'm now, it's changed because somebody stole my username, and now doing a parody account, which I'm taking as flattery, but I'm now
Yes.
Dr. Jen Unwin, all one word, on X, and I'm now working with Heidi as our kind of the name for what we do, and it all goes back into, it's actually a charity. We're called Food Addiction Solutions, and I'll send you the website link. It's under a broader website called the Collaborative Health Community, which has got another project as well that I'm not involved in, but I'm Food Addiction Solutions. And the conference, well, I'll send you the link, but if people look on my X posts, they'll see it all over that. But it's on Eventbrite, and in Eventbrite, if you put the International Food Addiction Consensus Conference 2024, it'll be the first thing that pops up, and then you can either buy an in-person or a live stream ticket. And if anyone wants to donate to support the conference and this work to to get the condition recognized by the WHO. We've got an event, not an Eventbrite, a Just Giving link to support that work. But I think that's probably on the Eventbrite page, or it's on my X feed.
Excellent. Well, we will be sure to link all of that so it's easier for people watching and listening to access that. But Dr. Jen Unwin, thank you so very much for coming on our show today and sharing all of your wisdom and knowledge with us. We really, really appreciate you.
Thanks so much. I've really enjoyed it.
As have I. We always enjoy chatting with you. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.